Hedge, her mordu. The phrase floated in the air with a lightness, spoken in a calm and intimate tone that contrasted with the rushed pace of the lobby. It was nearly 6:30 in the evening, and the floors of the building were beginning to quiet down. The main hall of the St. James Global Tower in Manhattan remained lit by cool-toned lights, reflecting off the grey marble floor. The glass doors opened and closed every 2 minutes, each time with someone walking out with their head down, talking on the phone or checking the time. The end of the workday brought both urgency and relief. But in the corner of the reception area, there was a different kind of silence, more focused, more still. Liv was on the phone. Her voice wasn't loud, but it still stood out. The softness with which the Swedish flowed from her lips caught attention, not because it was foreign, but because it felt out of place, as if it didn't belong in that world of heavy routines and mandatory formalities. She was around 27, fair skin, no noticeable makeup, her hair pulled tightly into a simple bun, discreet clothing, a white collared shirt, grey blazer, dress pants. Her eyes were slightly narrowed in concentration, but there was a small restrained smile at the corner of her lips, almost imperceptible. Liv didn't express much. She didn't need to. Her strength was in what she didn't say. Michael St. James stood a few meters away. He was by the elevators, unmoving, holding a leather folder in his right hand and his locked phone in the other. His driver was waiting outside, but he hadn't left yet. He was distracted, though he couldn't quite say by what. Or rather, now he could. He heard it. He didn't understand it, but he heard it. And it stopped him. It wasn't an important sentence. He didn't even know what it meant. But the sound of her voice in that language froze him in the middle of an automatic motion. It was like something in his brain had been stirred, not forcefully but with weight. The feeling of something forgotten slowly returning. Michael turned his head slightly, in an almost imperceptible movement. His eyes landed on the receptionist, sitting, serious, discreet as always. Liv was still on the phone, unaware of his presence. He saw her there every day. He knew her name from the company file. They had never spoken directly, apart from a polite good morning or a vague nod when passing in the lobby. To him, she was just another cog in that corporate mechanism that functioned like a precision machine. But now, in that moment, it was different. There was something in the melody of those words, something familiar without being clear. Her pronunciation was gentle, intimate, almost affectionate, and it affected him. Michael frowned slightly. He ran his thumb over the side button of his phone but didn't unlock it. He didn't usually stand idle in the middle of the lobby, much less for no reason. But there he was, and he kept looking. Liv twirled a pen between her fingers absent-mindedly, her eyes still fixed on the computer screen, speaking calmly. She didn't seem to notice she was being watched, or if she did, she was very good at pretending. Michael's gaze moved from her hand to her face. He observed the way she held her posture, upright but relaxed. The way her breathing was slow, steady, unhurried. There was something hypnotic about her serenity, something that violently contrasted with the world he inhabited. Contracts, deadlines, targets, tension. He didn't understand the language, but something in that cadence hit him in a strange way, as if his mind had been taken to an old, buried place, a space within him he preferred not to visit. The sound of the elevator doors opening behind him made him blink and look away. He took a deep breath, gripped the folder tighter. Michael was 44, known in the business world for being meticulous, relentless, always in control. There was no room for distractions in his life. His days were scheduled to the second. Time was his most precious asset. And yet there he was, standing still, his steps halted by something that made no sense. He looked back at Liv. She was chuckling softly now, a light, almost childlike laugh. She was speaking with someone dear, that much was clear. Her voice had taken on a sweetness Michael had never heard within those walls. The lobby panel pinged with a notification for the executive car's arrival. He read the LED display. St. James, black Cadillac, side exit. It took him 3 seconds to react. He slipped his phone into the inside pocket of his blazer, adjusted the lapel with an automatic gesture, took a deep breath, and walked to the revolving door. He went through without looking back. Liv hung up shortly after. The smile faded slowly. She picked up the call log sheet, typed a few notes into the system, and hit save. Then, for a moment, she sat still with her hand on the mouse. She looked toward the back of the lobby. It was empty. She knew he had been there. She knew he had stopped. She knew he had heard. But she did nothing. She adjusted her shirt collar under the blazer, turned her chair slightly, and got back to work. Outside, the Cadillac slid down 6th Avenue, blending into the flow of luxury cars, taxis, and honking horns. Michael stared out the window, motionless. The city moved around him like a living painting, but inside the car the silence was almost complete. He kept his eyes fixed on the reflections of the lights on the buildings, but inside something had stirred. A sound, a voice, a memory he couldn't name. And even without understanding a single word, he felt something had started there. Liv unlocked the door to her small apartment in Queens, with the key hanging from the cord around her neck. She was tired, but not physically. It was a fatigue that seeped in slowly, as if taking up space inside her. She dropped her bag on the couch, kicked off her shoes, and went straight to the kitchen. The space was cramped, with old but clean furniture. The fridge was covered in notes and drawings from her niece. In the corner of the living room, a crooked bookshelf held a row of books in 6 languages, all second-hand. While heating up some soup in the microwave, she leaned against the wall, looked up at the ceiling, her bun half undone. "He looked at me," she murmured, almost unintentionally. She recalled the exact moment, the way his eyes, light, serious, had followed her without blinking. "Stop it, Anna," she said to herself, shaking her head. "You're imagining things. He's Michael St. James, and you're just you." She left the soup aside and walked to the bedroom. The space was even smaller. A bed pushed against the wall, covered with a colorful quilt made by her grandmother. An old fan lazily turned on the ceiling. She sat down, opened her laptop on her lap, and started reviewing an article about linguistic variations in Northern Europe. That's what she did in her spare time, translated academic articles for extra income. Because the receptionist's salary barely covered rent and student debt. She tried not to think about him anymore, but it was hard to forget those eyes. In the Park Avenue penthouse, Michael poured himself a whiskey, neat. He walked over to the glass balcony overlooking the heavy New York sky. The city pulsed as always, cars, lights, distant horns. But he felt nothing. Leaning on the railing, he sifted through his thoughts as if rummaging through an old box. He rarely did that. But that voice, that accent, had touched something he'd buried. Greta. Her name echoed like a whisper. She had died nearly 10 years ago, but she was the one who had taught him to observe before speaking, to never judge by appearances, to not confuse kindness with submission. His chest tightened, not with grief. He wasn't a man who gave in to sentimentality, but with something close to guilt. He was interrupted by his phone vibrating on the counter, a message from his assistant. Meeting with the receptionist scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. as requested. Michael stared at the screen for a few seconds, then deleted the message, drank the rest of his whiskey in silence and turned off the lights. Liv arrived early the next morning. The building was still quiet, only the security guards and cleaning crew moving about with light steps and earbuds in. The white light at reception felt colder than usual, reflecting off the polished marble floor. She made a quick coffee in the break room, tied her hair with a new elastic band, and adjusted her glasses in the small mirror nearby. As she sat at her desk, she tried to focus on the screen, and not the butterflies rising from her stomach to her chest. At 8:42 a.m., the phone rang. "St. James Group, good morning," she answered automatically. On the other end, a neutral voice. "Miss Liv Costa, Mr. St. James has requested your presence in the executive office at 10 a.m. She froze. "Excuse me?" "It's confirmed. Please be there on time." The call ended. Liv held the phone unmoving. Her heart started to race, as if it knew something her mind hadn't yet caught up to. But why? Did I do something wrong? The rest of the morning, her mind bounced between absurd possibilities. At 9:55, she went to the bathroom, washed her face, and looked at herself in the mirror. White shirt, now freshly pressed. Basic black pants, but clean. Nothing elegant, nothing impressive. For the first time since she started there, she felt small. In the elevator, the silence was heavy. Each floor rising felt like a test. In the top floor hallway, everything was different. The carpet muffled her steps, and the large abstract paintings on the walls made her feel watched. At the executive reception, the assistant simply pointed to the door. "You can go in, he's expecting you." Liv took a deep breath, gripped her ID badge strap, and walked in. Michael was seated at a dark wood desk. He wore reading glasses, his posture upright, his face calm but alert. A folder lay open in front of him. When he saw her, he closed the papers calmly and gestured to the chair in front of him with a simple hand motion. "Sit." She obeyed silently. Hands folded in her lap, eyes trying to look steady. Michael looked at her for a few seconds before speaking. Liv Costa, 27 years old, applied linguistics at NYU, fluent in 6 languages, research internship in Helsinki, several international publications, and receptionist at St. James Group. He closed the folder and rested his hands on top of it. "Why?" Liv swallowed hard. "I needed a job. I sent out a lot of resumes, but no one replied. Bills don't wait, Mr. St. James. Neither does student debt." He stayed quiet a little longer than necessary. His jaw tensed slightly. Something in his eyes shifted, like he'd been struck from within. "Bills don't wait," he repeated quietly, more to himself than to her. He stood slowly and walked to the window, his back to her. The Manhattan skyline stretched out before him, grand and indifferent. "You have enormous potential, Liv. It's not normal for someone with your background and experience to be answering phones in a lobby." She didn't know how to respond. Silence returned until he turned around. "I want to make you an offer." Liv blinked, surprised. "We're beginning a new phase of expansion in Switzerland, Zurich. We need someone with cultural sensitivity, fluency, and intelligence to lead the local integration process. Someone who can read between the lines. Someone like you." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mind spun, trying to process. "Mr. St. James, this doesn't make sense. Why me?" "Because you're ready. You just haven't had the opportunity yet. And because you remind me of someone I deeply respected, who was also underestimated her whole life." He took a step forward but kept his distance. "Think it over. I don't want your answer now, but the offer is real. The position is open, and you are my choice." Liv felt her hands start to sweat. She opened her mouth to say something but closed it again. There was weight in his eyes, but no doubt, no hesitation. He was serious. Michael simply smiled with the corner of his mouth, a restrained but genuine smile. Liv didn't reply. She just looked at him, trying to understand if this was real. "You may go back to work," he said with a slight nod. "When you're ready to talk again, come find me." She stood slowly, still stunned, left the office without another word. Michael remained standing, facing the window, the folder still closed on the desk. For a moment he shut his eyes and thought of his grandmother, Greta. Maybe this time, there's still time. The office door closed behind her with a soft metallic click. Liv walked down the mirrored hallways of the top floor with measured steps, trying to keep her breathing steady. Her eyes traced the path as if trying to find a place to hide. Each step seemed louder than usual, as if the low heels of her shoes echoed against the overly thick carpet. The elevator took a while to descend. Inside, alone, she pressed the ground floor button and held her breath for a few seconds. A strange knot was forming between her chest and throat. She didn't know whether she wanted to smile or cry. When she reached the lobby, she sat at her desk as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She didn't yet know exactly how or how much, but she felt both light and heavy at the same time. She opened the appointment spreadsheet on her computer and for a few seconds stared at the screen as if it were a foreign language, a language she hadn't mastered yet. The next morning, the usual routine felt louder. The buzz of voices, heels, and ringing phones filled the space, but Liv was detached from it all. Her mind was still on the conversation from the day before. Right at 10 a.m. sharp, a discreet notification popped up on her screen. Meeting with HR. She took a deep breath and stood up. She didn't ask any questions. She just went. The room was bright, with tall windows and white walls. An elegant woman in a navy blue blazer greeted her with a cordial smile. Her name was Meredith. She was in charge of international recruitment. "Miss Costa, please have a seat." Liv sat down, outwardly composed, but with ice-cold hands. "We were informed of Mr. St. James's decision. We're already initiating the process for the role change. There will be a transition period, including training and integration with the new team. Everything will be handled discreetly." Liv tried to swallow the shock that had been stuck in her since the day before. "But what if I don't accept?" Meredith tilted her head slightly. Her tone was kind but steady. "The final decision is yours, of course, but the offer has been formalized." He was very clear about his choice. In the days that followed, Liv remained at reception, but something had shifted. People's glances lingered longer. Whispered comments, curious stares, restrained expressions of surprise. She tried to act natural, but every step felt more watched. On Thursday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, the phone rang. It was an internal call. "Miss Costa, Mr. St. James would like to have lunch with you today. He said he'll be waiting in the lobby at 12:45. She stayed silent for a second. "All right. Thank you." She hung up, looked at the clock. 20 minutes. She went to the second-floor restroom, fixed her bun, straightened her shirt collar, applied a light layer of lipstick. Her face felt warm, but her gaze was steady. As she came downstairs, Michael was already waiting, standing near the building's side entrance. White shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no tie. Posture firm, yet relaxed. A man used to being noticed without trying. "Ready?" he asked as she approached. "Yes." He opened the car door for her. Not a driver, not an assistant. He did it himself. The gesture disarmed her. The restaurant was 3 blocks away, discreet, with a dark brick facade and a black awning. From the outside it looked ordinary, but inside it was quiet, with few tables, white linens, and large windows, a space carefully chosen for conversations not meant to be overheard. They sat near the window, but far enough from the other guests. Michael ordered truffle pasta for him, warm salad, and fish for her. The waiter walked away, and silence settled for a few seconds. "I imagine you're surprised," he said finally. "Very." He nodded, stirring his water with a silver spoon. "When I saw your resume, he began, then paused. "When I heard you speak that language, it was like hearing someone I lost a long time ago." She looked at him but didn't ask. She waited. "My grandmother spoke Swedish. She cleaned houses her whole life, died without ever having a real opportunity. She was smart, observant, but no one ever saw her." Liv felt something tighten in her chest. "So was mine," she said softly. "She took care of me until the end. Never had a chance to leave where she was, but she taught me to dream." Michael watched her closely. It was the first time he heard her talk about herself. Her voice was firm, but there was warmth in her words. "That's why I want you to lead the expansion in Switzerland, because you're ready, and because there's still time. With you, there's still time to change a story." She gently bit her lower lip. The food hadn't even arrived yet, but the weight of the conversation was heavier than any dish. "You could hire anyone," she said, almost challengingly. "Why choose me? I'm just me." He leaned forward, his arms resting on the table. "Because you deserve it. Because you're discreet, strong, intelligent, and because I like you. Not just professionally. I like you." Liv went silent. Time paused for a few seconds. Her eyes searched his, trying to find contradiction, exaggeration, anything that would take back that statement. But there was nothing. "Even if nothing happens between us, the position is still yours, on merit." The words were spoken with such calm that they dissolved any defense. Michael didn't push, didn't insist. He simply let the truth linger, like a signed document. Lunch continued on a lighter note. They talked about cities, food, the differences between New York and Stockholm. She smiled more than once. He listened more than he spoke. There was something new between them, not urgency, not tension, just presence. On the ride back to the office, the car was quiet for a few minutes. When they stopped in front of the building, he glanced at her. "Take your time, no rush. If you accept, I want it to be for you, not for me." She nodded, offering a slight smile. "I'll think about it." Michael opened the door for her once more. Liv stepped out, adjusted her bag strap and walked to the revolving door without looking back. But when the glass reflected her image, she saw herself smiling, and she didn't quite know why. Friday dawned brighter than usual. The Manhattan sky looked almost gentle, and the air carried that rare crispness of early fall. Liv arrived early as always, but her eyes were different. They carried a new weight, and a spark she didn't yet know how to name. The lobby was already starting to fill as she walked through the revolving door, her badge swinging around her neck. She greeted the security guard with a small nod and made her way to the reception desk. Everything seemed in place, just like every other day. But inside her nothing was. She had thought about it all night. Michael's words echoed in her mind with a persistence that wouldn't fade. "I like you," not just professionally. He hadn't pressured her, hadn't insisted, but the sincerity made him impossible to ignore. At 11:17 a.m., a quiet notification lit up her monitor. "Meeting confirmed with expansion team, room 14B, 1 p.m. Her name was listed among the participants. No formal memo, no new conversation, just confirmation. She read it 3 times. Her heart tightened, as if unsure whether any of it was real. Across the building, on the 30th floor, Michael was also silent. His morning was packed with meetings, but he couldn't get the image of her out of his head, stepping out of the car, adjusting the strap of her bag, the reflection in the glass revealing a restrained smile. That's what moved him. Not the gesture, but what it meant. She didn't know it yet, but she had begun to believe. The meeting time arrived. Liv walked into the room with careful steps. There weren't many people there, just Meredith, 2 HR analysts, and the head of international expansion. Michael wasn't present. "Good afternoon," Meredith greeted her with a calm smile. "Starting today, you officially begin your transition into the new role. The team will guide you through the next steps. The onboarding schedule is already in the system." Liv sat down almost without realizing it. Someone handed her a tablet with access credentials, documents, and welcome emails. Everything was so organized, so final. She signed where asked, listened to the instructions attentively. But part of her still felt like she was watching it all from the outside. At the end of the meeting, Meredith walked her to the door. "You might feel like you don't belong at first, but trust me, that feeling passes." Liv nodded silently, because deep down she still wasn't sure. That same afternoon, the phone on her desk rang. "Mr. St. James asked that you come to the executive floor meeting room at 6 p.m. He said he'd like to speak with you before the end of the day." She answered with a simple "of course," but it took her a few seconds to put the phone down. Her whole body snapped to alert. At 5:58 p.m., Liv stood in front of the glass door to the meeting room. The hallway was empty. The building had already begun to empty out. She took a deep breath and walked in. Michael was seated at the head of the conference table. The lights were dimmer, softer, and a glass water bottle with 2 glasses sat at the center. He stood slowly when he saw her. "Liv, Mr. St. James." "Michael," he corrected with a smile. She nodded, composed, sat across from him, never taking her eyes off him. "I saw you were in the meeting with the expansion team. Is everything okay with your access?" "Yes, it was all very well organized. I'm still processing, honestly." He noted her hesitation but didn't interrupt. She began, her voice quieter. "Keep wondering if all of this is real. If I'll wake up and realize I dreamed it." Michael leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes the right things really do feel unreal, especially when we've learned not to expect much." The silence between them was brief, but it said a lot. He pulled a leather folder from beside his chair and placed it on the table. I want to show you the project. The first steps for the Swiss operation, local contacts, key points to watch. You're not going in blind. Liv opened the folder. Diagrams, objectives, timelines, all carefully prepared. You put this together? She asked, surprised. The team and I did, but yes, I personally reviewed everything. This matters to me, Liv. She ran her fingers over the pages, feeling the weight of each responsibility inside. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was real. Michael watched her closely. You look scared. I am, but I'm also excited and very grateful. He tilted his head slightly, as if wanting to say more but hesitating. Remember when I said I liked you? She nodded, eyes steady. I meant every word, but I also want you to know you can take this role, grow in this company, do all of it, and never go to dinner with me again. Never look at me as anything more than a professional colleague, and it will still be yours. The position is yours on merit. Liv felt the air still for a moment. Why do you say that with so much certainty? Because I know what it's like to carry the weight of an opportunity that feels like it comes with strings attached, and I never want to be that kind of man to you. The words hung in the air, as if written between them. She smiled, just slightly. Her eyes welled up, but they were steady. Thank you for saying that, for believing in me before I could. Michael said nothing else. He just slid the folder closer to her. Take it home. Study it in your own time. And if you have any questions, come find me. She stood slowly, holding the folder against her chest. Good night, Michael. Good night, Liv. She left the room with steady steps. The lobby was nearly empty. The elevator carried her to the ground floor in silence. That night, in her cramped Queen's apartment, Liv placed the folder on the kitchen table, between the bills and her mug of tea. She stared at it for a while. Then she opened it, spread out the papers, picked up a pen and began to study. Meanwhile, in the quiet penthouse on Park Avenue, Michael shut down his computer and walked out to the balcony. For the first time in a long time, he felt something stronger than exhaustion. He felt anticipation. On Monday morning, Liv arrived at the office before 8 a.m. The reception area was still empty, but she didn't go to her old desk. This time, she had a new destination, the 17th floor East Wing, where the International Operations Division was located. The badge hanging around her neck now opened a different door. As she walked through the mirrored hallway, her reflection looked like a different woman. Her bun was still neat, her glasses the same, but there was one new detail. She carried a black folder under her arm and walked as if she belonged exactly where she was, even if inside she was trembling. The new team received her with a certain coldness. No warm smiles, no welcome phrases. Just a nod from the supervisor and a desk assigned by the window. A closed laptop, a small water bottle beside it, and stairs. Plenty of stairs. Some were surprised, others judgmental. In the first meeting, Liv presented some of the ideas she had been studying over the weekend. She spoke about the linguistic challenges of integrating with the Zurich branch and suggested methods for cultural transition. When she spoke fluent Swedish in front of the executives, one of them cleared his throat uncomfortably, a grey-haired man with a seasoned demeanor. Quite specific, your approach, he commented, adjusting his glasses. But perhaps a bit too idealistic for a first interaction with the Swiss market, no? Liv nodded calmly. Maybe, but well-grounded idealism is what keeps companies human in global contexts. And it works. Zurich doesn't need just numbers. It needs meaning. The comment was followed by silence, a tense silence. Michael, seated at the back of the room, observed without saying a word, but when she finished her presentation, he gave a slight nod of recognition. After the meeting, a few co-workers spoke among themselves, not about the content but about her. One of them whispered loud enough to be heard, "Amazing how some people skip steps just by being charming." Liv heard it. She didn't react. That night she returned home exhausted. The words of the day weighed more than the work itself. She took off her shoes at the door, sat on the couch and stayed there for long minutes, staring at her own hands. She had known it would be hard. She just hadn't imagined this hard. The next morning, she found a yellow sticky note attached to her new monitor. "Excellent today, keep going. M." She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her bag. On Wednesday, around 7 p.m., Liv was finishing up organizing reports when the phone on her desk rang. "Miss Costa? Mr. St. James would like to invite you to dinner. He said he'll be waiting in the parking garage at 8 p.m., if that works for you." She hung up slowly. Her heart was racing, her mind divided. The invitation wasn't a surprise, but the timing was. At exactly 8 p.m., she went down to the basement. The parking garage was nearly empty, except for the black car parked by the wall. Michael stood beside it, wearing a dark coat and no tie. When he saw her, he opened the passenger door effortlessly. "I figured you might need some air," he said, without preamble. She nodded, got into the car without a word. The restaurant was elegant but unpretentious. Dim lighting, spaced-out tables, soft instrumental music, a place where you could speak and be heard. They sat near a wine shelf. He ordered wine. She asked for sparkling water. The conversation began with work, goals, strategies, integration challenges. But little by little, the topic shifted. "Your grandmother spoke Swedish too?" he asked, slowly turning his glass. "Yes. That was our connection, our escape. When the world felt too heavy, we'd watch Swedish shows and pretend we lived far away, far from Queens." Michael smiled without irony. "Greta used to read Swedish poetry out loud, even while scrubbing bank floors downtown. Sometimes I didn't understand the words, but I knew it was beautiful." "She raised you?" Liv asked gently. He nodded. "Taught me everything that mattered. The rest, I learned by trial and error. Life doesn't wait, even when you try to do everything right." For a moment, silence surrounded them. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was intimate. "And you?" he asked suddenly. "Why linguistics?" "Because words build bridges, and because for a long time I felt invisible. Studying languages was like saying, 'I exist, I have a voice.'" Michael looked at her intently, a gaze without urgency, without pressure. "You have more than a voice, Liv. You have presence." She looked away, trying to hide her reaction, but she couldn't stop the blush on her cheeks. Dinner flowed with an ease that felt almost intimate, as if their souls already recognized each other through the spoken words. They laughed about trips they'd never taken, about places that only existed in their imagination. They shared books that had helped them through dark times, like scars printed on pages, and childhood flavors that seemed like small sanctuaries in time. He listened, fascinated as she described the near-sacred simplicity of a potato soup made by her grandmother. There was a light in her eyes that disarmed him, as if each memory was a key unlocking a new space inside his chest. She in turn learned that he hated Sundays, not out of boredom, but because of the melancholy. There was something too lonely about afternoons that faded into silence, he said, and in that moment she no longer saw him as the firm, nearly untouchable man from the office, but as someone with cracks, someone who felt too much and hid it well. On the way out, the wind cut like glass. She shivered slightly. Without a word, Michael removed his coat and gently wrapped it around her shoulders, like someone protecting something rare. "You'll be cold," she murmured, surprised by the gesture, touched beyond words. "I'm used to it," he replied, with a simplicity that carried an old-fashioned kindness, nearly forgotten in today's world. On the drive to Queens, they didn't say much, but the silence between them was comfortable, almost dense, as if something was being stitched together there slowly but securely. When the car stopped in front of her building, she stepped out with the coat folded in her arms, as if it were a precious gift. "Thank you for dinner," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Thank you for the company," he replied, his eyes holding on to hers a second longer than they should have. She hesitated. A brief second, but inside her, time felt suspended. Then she extended the coat back reluctantly. "Keep it. I'll see you at work tomorrow." Michael took the coat, but as he did, his fingers brushed against hers. It was a brief contact. Brief, but something sparked. Neither of them pulled away immediately. On their skin, a nearly imperceptible warmth. In their eyes, something that said far more than any word could. "Good night, Liv," he said, in a low, almost intimate tone. "Good night, Michael," she replied, as if holding a secret between her lips. She entered the building, climbed the stairs slowly, feeling her heart out of rhythm. There was a beautiful kind of chaos inside her, as if something had shifted, moved, and made room for something new. He returned to the car and, on an impulse that wasn't rational, told the driver to just drive. No destination. As Manhattan's lights slid past the windows like glowing ghosts, Michael caught himself smiling. But it wasn't the smile of victory or of conquest. It was something else. It was presence. It was a warm, alive feeling that didn't come from goals reached or contracts signed. It came from something more human, rarer, and it had a name. Liv. They hadn't made any plans. Since that quiet dinner in the discreet city restaurant, there had been no new invitations, no messages beyond what was necessary. Yet, their presence in each other's world had become constant, even if silent. At work, they crossed paths with unsettling frequency. A folder exchanged in a meeting room, a formal question in a short email, a glance held a second too long during a presentation. There was a tension neither of them put into words, as if the silence between them were trying to understand what they were to each other. Then something shifted. It wasn't sudden, it was subtle. One detail at a time. It began with Liv being less spontaneous in conversations. She started avoiding eye contact when he walked into a room, became more careful with her words, and less available during breaks. Michael noticed. Of course he noticed, but he didn't confront her. At first, he thought it was exhaustion. The new role demanded a lot, and she was silently being pressured by stares and judgment. He knew that, but as the days passed, he realized the change ran deeper. It wasn't just the environment, it was him. On a grey Thursday afternoon, Michael entered the expansion team's workspace. He was carrying a revised international contract. He asked to review it personally with Liv. She agreed, but it was different. They stayed in the conference room, just the two of them, for a little over 30 minutes. They discussed data, adjustments, translations, but there were no smiles, no pauses where two people allow themselves to simply look at each other. When he stood to leave, he hesitated for a moment, stood beside the table as if searching for a window to ask something unscripted. "Are you okay?" he ventured. She didn't lift her eyes from the document. "All good, Michael. Just a lot of work." The way she said Michael, so neutral, so rehearsed, sounded like a wall. He simply nodded and walked out. The next day, Liv left the building early. The sun was still shining as she crossed downtown streets and took the subway to the suburbs. She needed to breathe. Needed to talk to someone who had known her long before all of this. On her mother's porch, 2 mugs of tea in hand, the silence between them stretched longer than usual. "So, this boss of yours, he's still taking you out to dinner?" her mother asked. Liv closed her eyes for a second. She wanted to laugh, but couldn't. "It's not like that, Mom." "Then what is it?" "I don't know." Her mother studied her for a long moment, then said, with a calm that hurt, "You don't look okay. You look torn." "I am." "Did he do something to hurt you?" "No." "Then what?" Liv took a while to respond. She fiddled with the mug's handle, her eyes lost in the yard. "I like him, but the world he lives in isn't mine. At work, every step I take feels like a provocation, and when people look at me, they don't see a professional. They see a poorly told story. Does he know that? He does. And what does he do? He respects me." Her mother sighed. "Sometimes respect hurts too," she said. On Monday morning, Michael waited for Liv in the conference room. It was early. He wanted to speak with her without anyone else around. She walked in right on time, carried her tablet and a folder of documents. She didn't seem surprised to see him there. "Can we talk?" he asked before she sat down. She stopped, not moving any closer. "About work?" "No, about you, about us." Liv took a deep breath. "Michael, I'm not sure there is an us." He stepped closer slowly. Didn't invade her space. "If I did something that made you uncomfortable, tell me. I'd rather hear it than guess." "You didn't do anything," she answered sincerely. "That's the problem." He frowned slightly, confused. "You were respectful, kind, honest, and still, I feel wrong. Wrong. For liking this, for wanting more, and at the same time, for not knowing how to handle what that means. He took one step forward. Liv. No. Let me finish. I'm the woman who came from reception. You're the man who runs this building. Between us, there's a gap no one wants to acknowledge, but I see it every day. In the meetings, in the hallways, in the whispers. She tried to hold back the emotion, but failed. And the worst part is that, no matter how much I try to tell myself it doesn't matter, it does. Because I feel it. I feel everything. Michael stayed silent, but his gaze was steady, present. So, what do you want me to do? Give me space. Let me breathe. Just for a while. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay, I won't push, but I won't lie. This isn't easy for me. It's not easy for me either. She left the room, not abruptly, but with a kind of dignity that stung. In the days that followed, Liv buried herself in work. Her performance was flawless, on time, precise, but mechanical. Her eyes didn't shine anymore. Michael withdrew as well, attended meetings, signed documents, delegated tasks. But he'd lost something, a silent anchor he hadn't realized he relied on until it was gone. And now it was gone. One random afternoon they found themselves in the same room, planning meeting with the Swiss team via video call. They sat on opposite ends of the table, spoke only when necessary, avoided eye contact, but when the meeting ended, people slowly filtered out, until only the two of them remained, once again. Liv gathered her papers. Michael closed his laptop. Liv, he said without lifting his eyes. She stopped, fingers still touching the folder. I just wanted you to know, I'm still here. Same as before. No expectations, but with presence. She didn't say anything, but she didn't leave right away either. She stayed for a few more seconds, then simply nodded discreetly and walked out. Michael stayed behind, looking at the empty chair in front of him. And he understood. Their silence now said more than any gesture ever could. It was late afternoon when Michael appeared in the company's internal library. The space was rarely used. It sat on an intermediate floor between the executive suites and the technical departments. Tall shelves, individual desks, leather armchairs, and a comforting silence that stood in sharp contrast to the corporate bustle on the other floors. Liv was there, alone, surrounded by papers, open books, and a forgotten mug of tea beside her keyboard. Her glasses had slipped slightly down her nose, and her bun was no longer as tight as it had been in the morning. She was reading intently, but the weariness on her face was unmistakable. When she saw him approach, she didn't startle, but she didn't smile either. Michael stopped a few steps from her, hands in his pockets, gaze focused but unhurried. You don't have to pretend you didn't see me, he said softly. Liv gently pushed a page aside and leaned back in her chair. There was no irony in her voice, just a trace of self-protection that didn't last long. I thought you were too busy to come down here. I am, he replied, but not so busy that I can keep pretending everything's fine between us. She stayed quiet, a different kind of silence now, no longer distance, just care. You disappeared, she said at last, and at the same time, you were everywhere. Michael sat down across from her. Not directly, but at a slight angle, his body turned gently toward her. A subtle gesture that said, I'm here, but I'm not pushing. I didn't want to pressure you. You asked for space. I respected that. And I appreciate it, Liv said sincerely. But I'm not sure I know what to do with it. He nodded slowly. Me neither. They sat that way for a few seconds. The distant hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Michael, she began, her voice quieter, I don't want you to think what we had didn't matter. I never thought that. But I got scared. I thought I was stronger than all the judgment, that it was enough just to feel, but it's not that simple. And I didn't know how to say that without sounding like I was giving up. Are you? Liv looked him in the eye for the first time in that conversation, and in the way she looked at him, he knew the answer. No. No, she said firmly, but I need things to move slowly, without noise, without fear of looking small or lost when I don't know what to do. Michael leaned forward slightly, his hands near the edge of the table. You've never been small, Liv. Not when you were at reception. Not now, and with me, you don't have to be strong all the time. But I want to be, she said, because that's what I've built. That's what keeps me whole. He understood, not with words, with presence. Okay, then we move slowly. No rush. But I need to tell you something. What? I miss you, not the professional you, not the expansion manager. I miss the Liv who talked about potato soup and hated alarm clocks. She smiled. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't polite or calculated. It was genuine, almost childlike. And I miss you, she admitted. The way you listen to me, even when I don't say anything. Michael placed his hand on the table, not to take hers, just to let it rest there. A quiet gesture, no pressure. She looked at it for a moment, then placed her hand gently over his. She didn't interlace their fingers, just touched, and stayed that way. Then maybe we're still here, she whispered. Maybe we never left, he replied. In the weeks that followed, something changed between them. There were no announcements, no declarations, but there was presence. Michael began showing up at Liv's team meetings again. He didn't speak much. He observed, asked specific questions, and listened to her answers attentively. Not like a CEO, but like a man who knew that woman beyond her reports. Liv, in turn, slowly regained her lightness, subtly but noticeably. She started greeting him in the hallways with a glance that said more than words. Sometimes she left a note with highlighted comments on documents he reviewed. He'd reply with a folded message tucked into the folder. One morning, when Liv opened her laptop, she found a thick paper card tucked between the pages. I heard you like difficult languages. How about a silent dinner? Tonight, 8 p.m. M. She smiled and replied with a short message. I'm in, but only if there's soup. Dinner took place at a small Scandinavian restaurant on the Upper East Side. Little known, intimate. Corner table, low candlelight, menu in Swedish. They didn't speak much, ordered dishes they could barely pronounce, shared dessert. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was a language. As they walked side by side to the car afterward, Liv stopped suddenly. Why did you choose me? Michael looked at her, puzzled. In the beginning, when you first asked to talk. Why? He thought for a moment. It wasn't an automatic answer. Because your voice took me back to a place where I was just a boy, and I didn't know I still remembered that place. Liv held his gaze for a long moment, then said calmly, maybe I'm remembering who I was too, before I was just effort. He reached out. This time she took his hand, for real. They got into the car in silence. But now, it was a different kind of silence. The kind you share when you know you don't need to rush to get anywhere. In the days that followed, their time together was no longer the exception. They sometimes had coffee on the company terrace, shared ideas before meetings. They didn't hide, but they didn't show off either. There was a quiet agreement between them. Whatever was growing from the inside. One afternoon, Liv brought a new integration proposal to Michael's office. He was hunched over documents. When he saw her, he offered a short but genuine smile. I'm still not used to your presence feeling natural, but it's the best unexpected thing that's happened here. I could say the same. She placed the project on the desk. Here it is, reviewed, translated, and with 2 improvement suggestions. Michael took the file, but he didn't open it right away. He just looked at her. You know, Liv, when this all started, I thought I was just recognizing hidden talent. And now? Now, I see a mirror. She didn't respond. She simply stepped forward and gently rested her forehead against his shoulder for a moment. A brief gesture, but full of meaning. The kind of gesture that only happens when 2 worlds, after so much resistance, finally begin to accept that they belong to each other. The house was small, quiet, tucked away on a tree-lined street in Brooklyn. Michael had bought the property 6 months earlier, but rarely spent time there. Since he'd grown closer to Liv, however, the space had stopped being just an investment. It had become their place, a retreat for the days when the outside world felt too heavy. There was no excessive luxury, just comfort and calm. A light grey linen sofa, a bookshelf filled with architecture books, a floor lamp beside the armchair where Liv liked to read. It was their refuge, even without an official name. That morning, sunlight filtered gently through the blinds. Michael was making coffee in the kitchen, while Liv sat on the edge of the bed, a white envelope in her hands. The paper was thick, the folds still fresh. She had read the contents 3 times, but still didn't know how to say it. It wasn't fear, it was care. The kind of news that changes everything, even when people say nothing will change. Michael entered the room with 2 mugs of coffee. When he saw her sitting so still, his brow furrowed with quiet concern. "Everything okay?" he asked, offering her a mug. Liv took it with one hand, but didn't drink. With the other, she handed him the envelope. "We need to talk." He sat beside her, eyes fixed on the envelope. "What is it?" She didn't answer, just looked at him. He understood. He should open it. He pulled the paper out slowly, read in silence. When he reached the end, he stayed still. Then he went back to the beginning, as if needing to confirm. Finally, he looked at her. 3? Liv nodded, a timid smile on her face, eyes shimmering. 3. He took a deep breath. His gaze drifted for a moment before returning to her. Was it planned? No, but it also wasn't avoided. A silence between them. Michael rested his elbows on his knees, rubbed his hands together, and exhaled slowly, like he was trying to gather his thoughts before they overwhelmed him. "Are you okay?" "Yes, scared, but okay." "And how do you feel?" Liv took a few seconds to respond. "That it doesn't make sense, and yet it makes perfect sense." Michael let out a low laugh, nervous but also relieved. He ran a hand over his face and shook his head. "I never thought I'd be that guy, the one with kids, the one who builds a family." "And I never thought I'd be a mum," she replied honestly. "But now, I can't imagine anything else." He sat in silence for a few moments, then turned fully toward her, his eyes steady. "I'm with you, Liv, through all of it, no matter what." She took a deep breath. Relief washed over her entire body. "I know. We're going to have to change some things," he said, already slipping into his usual practical tone. "Yeah, a lot of things. Like where we're going to live, for example." Liv raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Already making plans?" "Trying to think logically. 3 babies, Liv. That apartment in Queens won't cut it. And this house well, it's great, but it's still in the middle of chaos. Maybe we should consider something else, somewhere new." "A new beginning?" Michael looked at her and nodded. "Yes, but not starting from zero, a beginning with history, with everything we've built." She grew quiet for a few seconds, then murmured, "Sweden." Michael furrowed his brow slightly. "The Zurich branch?" "No, Sweden itself. The country, the roots, the languages. My grandmother. Yours. It's the only place that feels neutral. Not yours, not mine, ours." He didn't respond right away, but something in his expression said the idea made sense, deeply. "All right," he said at last. "Let's go to Sweden." 2 months later, Liv sat on a park bench in Stockholm. A blanket draped over her legs and 3 strollers lined up in front of her. It was autumn. Golden leaves blanketed the ground, and the tall branches swayed with the cold wind. She looked at the faces of her children, identical yet each unique, and smiled with a kind of tenderness that didn't need words. The world felt still in that moment. Across the park, a familiar voice called her name. "Liv?" She turned. It was Clara, a former college friend she hadn't seen in years. They embraced tightly. You had 3? Clara said, moved. "Yes, all at once." "Oh my God, and you live here now?" "I do, started over." Clara looked at her with genuine admiration. "I always knew you were different, just in the wrong place. Now you're whole." Liv smiled, her eyes brimming. "I think for the first time, I feel seen. Not for what I do, but for who I am." That night, after putting the babies to sleep, Liv stepped out onto the balcony of their new home. The chilly breeze brushed her face, and the Scandinavian silence filled the air with a stillness almost impossible to find in Manhattan. Michael appeared shortly after, holding a small box in his hands. "What's that?" she asked. He stepped closer and handed her the box. "You're proposing now?" "Yes, but not because of the babies. Because of you. Because love grew. It grew with every sleepless night, every doubt, every silence we faced together." She opened the box. A simple ring, no flash, but full of weight. Liv didn't say anything. She just stepped forward and embraced him tightly, like someone recognizing their fate, like someone choosing once again to stay. Inside the house, the lights were off, except for the soft glow of the nursery lamp. 3 calm breaths filled the room. Outside, the world continued at its usual pace, but between the two of them, time had stopped, and for the first time it was exactly enough. Inside the house, the silence was full of life. Stuffed toys scattered on the rug, a bottle forgotten beside the couch, a tiny shirt draped over a kitchen chair. The mess of people living deeply. Still in his arms on the balcony, Liv closed her eyes for a moment. It was strange to think of everything that had led them here. An accent in a lobby, a glance that stopped time, an improbable conversation in a boardroom. And now 3 babies asleep in the next room, a quiet proposal, a small ring, and a love that no longer fit in words. There was no room left for doubt. Their love hadn't started like in the movies. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping promises. It came with care, with pauses, with small choices made, day after day. Michael felt it too. He was no longer the man who saw the world only through contracts and deadlines. Control was still part of him. It was his nature. But now there was room for the unexpected, for tenderness, for her touch at the end of the day and the scent of chamomile tea from the kitchen, for the quiet laughs they shared in the dark, while one of the babies woke for the 3rd time. They had made it through judgment, through silence, through fear. Not because they were certain, but because they chose not to run. And now, here, they didn't need to say anything, because they knew. Everything had changed, and yet in all the ways that mattered, they were still the same, 2 worlds that had recognized each other, and, in the right time, had chosen to walk side by side. The house in Sweden was made of light wood and wide windows. There was no luxury, but everything had soul. Each object carried a story. The knitted blanket Liv had made in the final weeks of her pregnancy, the framed Swedish words hanging in the kitchen, the wall clock inherited from Michael's grandmother, always 2 minutes late but never fixed. It was a house made to breathe together, with the sounds of babies, the silences of adults, the small steps learning to walk, and the bigger ones learning to stay. Time passed the way it tends to when life is rooted in the essential, slowly but steadily. The triplets grew with loud laughter and a hunger for the world, each with their own rhythm, their own personality. Michael still joked that the 3rd had been the surprise of the surprise. Liv would laugh and say he was the one most like her. He had the calm, he had the eyes. They didn't post photos. They didn't write long captions. They didn't talk much about what they were living. They simply lived. And in that small space between mountains and cold lakes, they found the kind of happiness that doesn't shout, it just exists. Michael remained involved with the company, but now remotely with a reduced schedule. He had learned to shut the laptop at 6, to put the kids to bed, to cook Friday dinner, while Liv read Swedish poetry aloud, just to tease him. She said he needed to practice the language. Liv, in turn, had returned to her studies. She translated scientific articles, offered cultural consulting online, and slowly worked on a book about communication and belonging. But everything without rush. She no longer needed to prove anything to the world. She had already proven it to herself. Sometimes she went for walks alone on the colder mornings. She'd pass the silent trees and think about how much had changed, and how even so, she was still who she had always been. On the quietest nights, after putting the children to bed, the two of them would sit on the living room floor with simple glasses of wine, speaking softly, laughing about the small things. And in those moments, she would look at Michael with a tenderness that only grows with time, as if to say, "Thank you for staying." He wouldn't say anything, but his gaze would return the same. It was a love that no longer needed affirming, the kind of love that shows itself in waking up together every day, even when tired. That lives in the blanket pulled over someone in the middle of the night, in the tea made in silence, in the rushed handwriting on a note left on the kitchen counter, reminder, you are the best part of my day. Visitors were rare, life was private, but Clara, her college friend, came by occasionally. They'd sit on the porch, and Clara would ask how she had done it. Liv would smile, her eyes distant as if traveling back in time, and answer with the calm of someone who no longer needed to convince anyone. I stopped trying to fit in and started building where I belong. At night, when everything finally slowed down, the two of them would meet on the balcony, each with a mug in hand, a blanket over their legs, and eyes on the sky. They didn't always speak, but when they did, the days seemed to make more sense. "Sometimes it still feels a little unreal," she said one night, her forehead resting on his shoulder. "What does?" "This, us, here." Michael wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "Maybe because it's rare, but not accidental." She fell silent, breathing slowly. "Do you remember the note in the library?" she asked suddenly. "You were never small," he murmured, eyes closed. "I never forgot." One day during a gentle snowfall, Liv found an old box in the attic. Inside were faded company papers, a yellowed contract, and a copy of the first resume she had submitted to St. James Group, the one Michael had read before reaching out to her for the first time. She held the paper in both hands and sat on the cold floor, her heart warmed by the memory, not of the job, but of the journey, of how hard she had fought to be seen, to be heard, and how, without realizing it, that's exactly what had changed everything. She carefully put the paper back, closed the box, went downstairs, where Michael was lying on the rug with the kids, building a block tower that collapsed every 3 seconds. But he always started again. "That's going to fall again," Liv teased. "They say this time it'll reach the ceiling," he replied, not looking up. The tower fell 30 seconds later. Laughter, and another start. She sat on the couch, watching the scene with warmth in her chest. That's where she lived now, between children's voices, blocks on the floor, and a man who had learned to be a father with the same dedication he once gave to being a CEO. Liv stayed there, quietly watching. That scene, so simple, said more about the man he had become than any boardroom ever had. Michael noticed her gaze and smiled. She moved closer, lay down beside him, the children laughing between them. The tower fell again. They rebuilt it again. Years later, when the boys were already running through the house like little hurricanes, and life had settled into a different rhythm, more chaotic but still grounded in the same love, Liv received a letter in the mail, an invitation to give a lecture at a Swedish university on cultural mobility, languages, and human connection. She didn't hesitate. She accepted, prepared like she hadn't in a long time. When she stepped into the auditorium, she felt the same nerves she'd had back in college. But once she began speaking, something inside her steadied. She told her story without hurry, without chasing applause, not with punchlines, but with the weight of someone who had lived every word with her whole self. She spoke about growing up in a place where little was expected of her, where being smart wasn't enough, and dreaming was almost considered a distraction. She told how she had learned to make herself heard in foreign languages before ever being heard in her own. How being fluent in Swedish, French, English, and German didn't erase the sting of being ignored while handing out resumes, but gave her the breath to keep going. Because sometimes the bridge between who you are and how the world sees you begins with the courage to translate yourself. She spoke about the day everything started to shift, It wasn't some grand event. It was a simple phrase, spoken in an unfamiliar language, in an unexpected place. But it was there, in that unintentional gesture, that life began to turn. Because someone listened. And more than that, someone saw. She didn't romanticize the path. Said that for a long time she never felt ready, and maybe never would have. But even so, she went. Because the hardest part isn't being capable. It's allowing yourself to believe you're worthy. After the lecture, a student approached her, eyes intent, voice low as if carrying his own invisible weight. "How did you know you were ready?" Liv looked at him for a few seconds, then smiled, a calm, unhurried smile. "I didn't, but someone saw it before I did. And sometimes, that's all we need. One person who believes until we can believe too." She paused, then added, "But there comes a time when no one can do that for you anymore. You'll need to hold your own voice. You'll need to stand, even if you're shaking, and you'll realize that being ready is never a certainty. It's a choice, and it begins the moment you decide not to hide anymore." That night, back home, Liv found the table set. 3 colorful little plates, steaming soup, napkins folded in a hurry, and Michael leaning against the kitchen doorway with that look that said everything without saying anything. She sat beside him. No speech, no celebration. Just a simple gesture, a shared plate, a touch of hands, a quiet smile that spanned years. Time had passed, priorities had shifted, the days were shorter, the nights longer. But within the walls of that house, there was something that had never weakened. The care, the presence, the daily decision to stay, even when it would have been easier to walk away. There, among toys on the floor and accumulated fatigue, they had discovered the truth no one teaches. Happily ever after isn't a destination. It's a practice, a quiet labor carried out in the margins of the everyday. It's listening without rushing, it's sharing silence, it's continuing together, even when life is far from extraordinary. Happily ever after wasn't the end of their story. It was the way they had chosen to live it every day, again and again, until staying became the greatest act of love. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.